Okay, we're good to go. Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Derbyshire Dales District Council, meeting of the Local Plan Committee, held here in Matlock Town Hall on Wednesday 13th of May 2026. I'm Councillor Peter O'Brien, represent the Hathersage Ward on the District Council, and I'm Chair of the committee here this evening. I'll introduce the other colleagues sitting on the table at the top here in a moment, but just a couple of housekeeping issues. It's good to see so many members of the public here this evening. I think we welcome that as a local plan committee. It's really good to see the community engaged in the process. There's no fire alarm planned for this evening, so if the alarm does go off, please make your way as quickly as possible through the fire exit to the door you came in and down the stairs, or alternatively through the fire exit on my right, and the assembly point is in the courtyard outside. The toilets downstairs and on the left, ladies and gents, downstairs on the left, or there is a toilet on the left of the corridor or out the door in which you came, which has disabled facilities. There's water, tea and coffee available to everyone in the corridor outside, so please feel free to make yourself comfortable with a drink if you'd like to. Now we've got a full agenda this evening. We're getting into the heart of the local plan. Just to say that I'm going to change the order of the agenda this evening in respect of the two main items for discussion. That's item 5 and item 6 on the agenda. We're going to take item 6 first, which is the evidence-based update, and then item 5 second, which is the spatial development strategy and the housing allocations. I think when you hear the reports presented, you'll understand the reason for that. So we're going to be taking item 6 first, and then followed by item 5. So just to introduce colleagues here from left to right. On my left I've got Christy Lim, who's one of our principal solicitors. On Christy's left is Steve Capes, who's our Director of Place and Economy. We've got Anna Paxton, then next left, who looks after our communications, and John Ramsey from our Democratic Services, our committee section, who looks after the administration of the meeting. On my right, we've got Councillor David Hughes, who is the Vice Chair of the committee, and then we have our planning team. We have Matt Bowers, Esther Lindley, Claire Francis, and Emily Lim. Emily is sitting down on the table over there. So item 1 on the agenda this evening is apologies for absence, please, John.
Through you, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Roger Shelley, and their substitute is Councillor Marilyn Franks. We've also received apologies from Councillor David Chapman, and their substitute is Councillor John Boynton.
Thank you, John. Now, our second item, very important item on the committee this evening, is public participation. And a number of parts to that. Part 1 is members of the public, district councillors who've asked to speak at this evening. So each person speaking has 3 minutes allocated to them. That's they're all set down by the district council. So I'm going to take them in order. Our first speaker this evening is Councillor Susan Hobson. Councillor Hobson, if you'd like to make your way up. As I said, we've got a fair number of people speaking, so it'd be really helpful if you could try and keep to the 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. This report tells of the special rural character of the Derbyshire Dales. It talks of thriving, sustainable communities that respect our rural landscape. However, the actual plan will ensure that there won't be a patch of grass left between Roseley and Matlock. These areas do not want to be swallowed up to become Greater Matlock. This plan feels exactly like a numbers exercise to meet government housing targets, rather than a careful approach to protect what makes the Dales special. All this housing risks harming the very qualities that define this area. Darley-Dale, Snitterton, Hackney and Northwood are already under heavy pressure from traffic along the A6 corridor. Further development here would worsen congestion and harm the historic and landscape character of the Derwent Valley. Tansley, a small village, would lose its unique rural identity if asked to take even more growth. Ashbourne and the villages of Doveridge and Brailsford already struggle with drainage, parking, school places. Further major growth without guaranteed infrastructure improvements would overload these settlements and harm their historic character and rural appeal. I urge you to listen to your local communities. People like the Tansley Parish Council Chair, Vicky Rains, and to the submissions from Darley-Dale Town Council and its councillors, those speakers from Ashbourne and elsewhere. These people know their communities and, importantly, they cherish them. Their detailed, factual submissions have been ignored by Derbyshire Dales District Council with their revolving door of consultants and officers. Please, committee, protect and enhance what makes the Derbyshire Dales unique. Our people, your people, deserve better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hobson. Next speaker, also a Derbyshire Dales District Councillor, Stuart Lees. Stuart.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak tonight. Ashbourne and the surrounding villages still count for most of the housing detailed in this new local plan, which is proposed. I note that Wirksworth and Matlock, that are also a Tier 1 settlement, still have a very small allocation of proposed new housing detailed in this document. How can this be when we're all Tier 1? Who decided what tier each settlement went into? I note Clifton, little village near Ashbourne, is in Tier 3, but really it should be in Tier 4, with its lack of facilities, bus routes, to say the least. Ulham Ward, very similar, but at least this does have a bus route. The infrastructure can barely cope with developments taking place at the moment, so surely infrastructure should be in place before a decision is taken on any of the sites. This should include provision for the health services, dentists, educational requirements for all levels of schools, sewerage capability, rainwater runoff, which should also be assessed with Severn Trent and the Lead Flood Authority. The highway's impact is also a great concern, with congestion already causing problems, especially in Ashbourne, which has high levels of pollution, as you all know. With the allocation of sites, I cannot see any further development sites other than the Ashbourne Industrial Estate. I also note that proposals for traveller sites are coming up at planning and the community and environment committees. If these applications fail, where does it leave the local plan? As I believe that the site is required for the new local plan. Can you confirm if the car parks owned by Derbyshire Dales District Council are going to be removed from this local plan, as none are developable as traveller sites, temporary or permanent? I note that the sites which are now shortlisted for Ashbourne are certainly going to cause more traffic issues for the town. To name a few: land to the rear of 120 Green Road, reference SLAL AA 926, which is the only site north of Ashbourne, open green farmland, which I feel we should be retaining for future sports use land, as we have no allocation within Ashbourne for such land facilities. This has also had numbers reduced from 88 to 88 from the original 200 plus. Also, land at Gate Farm, Ashbourne, which is a key route which could be the pedestrian link from the Ashbourne Industrial Estate development. This should be already developed or in the process for a road to link Ashbourne or the A515, 517, to the industrial estate.
Could you wind up, please, Stuart?
Overall, Ashbourne has a large population of new housing allocation with no new infrastructure being put in place, as I stated previously, which is going to increase road safety issues. Villages around Ashbourne, and particularly Doveridge and Clifton, very little infrastructure to cope with the new allocation of homes, and very little public transport with no shops. Thank you very much, Chair. I'll wind up rather than carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Our next speaker, Councillor Vicky Rains from Tansley Parish Council.
Good evening. My comments do not relate to officers who have been instructed to work within certain parameters placed upon them by this committee. Because of the continued lack of all assessments, the allocations do not appear to be plan-led. Your draft spatial development strategy states villagers will see modest new housing development. And yet there is a possibility of 200 new homes in our rural village. Completions since 2020 are not factored in. There is no cumulative assessment for settlements who have had new development within that period. Many settlements not having any new allocations and relying on 2017 allocations to make up their numbers. Sustainable development should meet present needs without compromising future generations. Using this criteria, it would appear Tansley is already unsustainable, with residents having to travel 2.5 miles to reach the nearest doctor, pharmacy and supermarket, and secondary school education full at capacity. One would also assume a lack of sustainability when fresh drinking water has to be tankered into the village during the summer months, and the fact that sewage regularly comes out of the stream that can by a sewer overflow and causing pollution within our stream, which is adjacent to the Scout Hut. We have no written evidence of any mitigation within your appraisals. NPPF states significant development should focus on locations which can offer a genuine choice of transport modes. Tansley residents rely on the car and taxi to access our service centre, Matlock, as there is no reliable bus service. There are serious concerns related to any development of Jack Hill Farm, a green agricultural field outside the settlement boundary with a proposed access from the A615 and a potential additional 300 cars egressing onto the busy road. The proposed site having an aquifer and much of the land being boggy throughout the year. The excess surface water coming from this elevated land washing away the footpath and destroying surface of a tarmac road during Storm Babette. Have the committee worked with East Midlands Combined Authority? And do your plans reflect their spatial strategy, which focuses on Derbyshire Dales as a tourist-led economy, and the correlation that development and land should be reflected in housing growth to ensure viability of an area and sustainability? I formally request the reassessment of Jack Hill based on a sustainability appraisal to include access to services and an economic viability assessment to ensure someone can afford to develop it prior to any further selection. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rains. Next speaker, Councillor Mike Lyon from Doveridge Parish Council. if you press one of the buttons there.
Derbyshire Parish Council acknowledge that our village is a prime site for DDDC to facilitate new houses being built. The village is on the very margins of the district with easy access, if you have a car, to the market town of Uttoxeter, which provides jobs, shops, leisure facilities, recycling facilities and even a secondary school that our children used to be able to go to. Conveniently, Uttoxeter is in Staffordshire, so DDDC can get the benefit of fulfilling its housing needs whilst relying on Staffordshire councils to fund all the redevelopment of Uttoxeter. It's ideal. Derbyshire Parish Council would also like to congratulate DDDC in its unending tenacity in ensuring that all barriers to new housing in Derbyshire are overcome. Let me give you a few examples. DDDC have stated that they wish to develop a local plan where new housing is concentrating in settlements of Tier 3 and above. In the draft settlement hierarchy issued in October last year, Derbyshire was on the cusp of falling into Tier 4 due to the loss of some amenities in the village. The Parish Council identified a number of issues with the draft scoring, including an incorrect statement that the village was within a 10-minute drive of JCB's headquarters in Rochester. We note that the final issue of the settlement hierarchy has utilised a highly imaginative solution to this dilemma and redefined the grade boundaries. So now Derbyshire comfortably sits in Tier 3 again. Another, Site AA348, a site for 18 houses off Marston Lane. Suitability, availability and achievability summaries all say no. And the viability assessment is rated red with the comment, the site is unviable, constraints to development exists. Final conclusion, developable, rated green with no justification. This site was then subject to detailed planning permission. Twice noise consultants concluded that the site was too noisy due to the proximity of the A50. Undeterred, DDDC accepted the conclusions of a third consultant who deemed the site viable despite it failing to meet the noise limits contained within BS 8233 and World Health Organization guidelines by invoking a concession designed for noisy urban areas, not rural settlements. A masterstroke. Site AA347. This parcel of land has previously been refused planning permission following an appeal by the then developers to the Secretary of State. Undeterred by this, DDDC have allowed this parcel of land to pass the selection process in this review. Officers have rated the land red in heritage constraints and landscape and visual impact categories. Undeterred, DDDC have engaged consultants who have conveniently overridden the views of the expert public servants and deemed the land developable. So again, congratulations. It appears that you're developing a master plan where you will build hundreds of additional houses in Derbyshire, resulting in the village increasing by almost 75% compared with 2018. And best of all, DDC will pick up almost no obligations for the new residents because of our proximity to Uttoxeter, which is on the tab of Staffordshire County and East Staffs District Council. And finally, I'd just like to commend the work ethic of this committee and the office and the consultants that support it. On the 29th of April, you approved detailed development of the preliminary evidence base, including 28 new sites. Within 3 working days, you've completed the detailed assessments of these new sites and updated all existing development sites to produce a 973-page document pack for this meeting. That's very impressive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lyon. Next speaker, Councillor David Chapman from Derbyshire Town Council.
Chair, officers and committee members, Derbyshire Town Council and the residents of Old Hackney Lane have a specific and serious planning concern about SLAR 1093. Your papers propose allocating land between Old Hackney Lane and Hackney Road for 14 homes. The Highways Authority confirms this site has no access to any adopted road whatsoever. Excuse me. Your own assessment suggests that to make this site proceedable, and I quote, the internal layout of the permitted site would have to be amended, referring to the Stancliffe Homes development next door. Let me be direct about what this means. Stancliffe Homes hold the only key to this site, and Stancliffe Homes want to develop the hillside. DDTC also wonders whether Stancliffe Homes now actually own the fields above and adjacent to its approved site, and it would be perhaps in the public interest to know if Stancliffe Homes submitted sites 475 and 791 in the call for sites. We raise it because the offer that you make in your assessment hands Stancliffe Homes an unchallenged, non-competitive, commercial monopoly over a local plan allocation without public evidence of the prior agreement, without a legal mechanism, and without any public process. It doesn't take a genius to work out that if 1093 is allocated tonight, you are also step by step unlocking the other currently undevelopable sites above it, 791 and 475. Combined, that would be a further 4 hectares of hillside land that is today protected, potentially being released as a ratchet approval with only one possible beneficiary, Stancliffe Homes. And so the sequential coalescence begins and Darley-Dale becomes a suburb of Matlock. You are maybe unwittingly potentially opening up public scrutiny into the relationship between DDDC and Stancliffe Homes, or if the offer was written by the consultants, the relationship between the consultants and Stancliffe Homes. This is a defining moment in the local plan process, and if its seriousness wasn't realised before I spoke tonight, I hope it is now. The ratchet principle that is risk of being used here is so important to the public domain that DDC felt it important that this is captured on video tonight for future reference. But don't worry, I hear you say. We have PD10 to prevent that. As if never using PD10 ever as an objection to planning applications within its policy boundary settings or intent was bad enough, you don't actually have the revised wording or boundary information available to you tonight because they're not being confirmed until next month, a month after you have to allocate the site tonight. On that basis alone, surely you can't vote tonight as you don't have all the material planning aspects in front of you. Individual assessments won't reflect the reality of what could happen here.
Could you wind up, please, Councillor Chapman?
Sure. A cumulative assessment must be carried out. Let me just conclude, if that's the case. Finally, Darley-Dale Town Council have formally asked for a drainage impact and sewer capacity assessment before these sites were allocated. That request has not been answered other than to say it won't be answered. The public may not realise that the green sewerage ratings in your assessment papers...
I must ask you to finish now, please.
Sure.
Thank you. Next speaker, Councillor Martin Spencer from Ashbourne Town Council.
Thank you. Good evening. Ashbourne Town Council objects to the scale and unrealistic nature of the proposed housing allocation in the local plan for our small market town. Residents are not opposed to sensible development. We understand that homes are needed, but development must be proportionate, sustainable and supported by infrastructure that already struggles to cope with the population we have already today. Our doctors' surgeries are outstretched, our schools are at near capacity and parents are increasingly concerned about access to places. Emergency services are stretched thin, public transport is limited, yet we are being asked to accept a major expansion without any credible guarantee that these essential services will be improved first rather than promised later. Road congestion is another serious concern. Hundreds of additional homes will inevitably mean hundreds more vehicles. Increased traffic brings increased pollution, poorer air quality, more noise and greater danger for pedestrians and cyclists. There is also the environmental cost. The proposal threatens biodiversity, green spaces and wildlife habitats. Once these spaces are lost, they are lost forever. Planting a few trees elsewhere does not replace ancient landscapes, mature habitats, or the natural environment that the local people value deeply. But this issue is about more than the number and traffic reports. It is about identity. This is not just any town. It is a historic market town with a unique heritage and tradition that has survived for generations. The globally recognised event is not simply a spectacle played over 2 days once a year. It is part of the cultural fabric, history and identity of the community. The scale and spread of overdevelopment risks ending the character of open spaces that allows the tradition for this to continue. What is the point of building so aggressively that we destroy the very qualities that make the town very special in the first place? Sustainable planning should protect communities, not overwhelm them. Growth should enhance a town, not fundamentally alter it beyond recognition. I urge the Council and planning authorities to recognise this allocation, to listen to residents and to pursue developments that is realistic, infrastructure-led, environmentally responsible and respectful of our heritage. Because once the character of the town is lost, we will never get it back. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer.
Thank you.
Speaker, Councillor Steve Wayne, who's a Derbyshire Dales District Councillor.
Thanks, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak. The local plan committee and officers working to develop the new local plan. This actual is very complex work and has been made much more difficult due to the unacceptable blanket increase in housing numbers impacting our local communities from the central government and also throughout the rest of the country. We're all being made to suffer, and there have been some very valid points by people in relation to the justification for this area, because if this is to be treated by AMCA as a tourist type area, then to have all these houses are going to bring more people, more cars, and at the end of the day we're going to have gridlock. So we're going to turn people away from the Peak Park and these sorts of areas. Within my Matlock West ward, there have been many significant developments over the last 7 years. Many of these have proved problematic, particularly in relation to surface water runoff, foul water discharge and highways. In my opinion, more robust investigations by statutory consultees at the local plan stage would have provided more comprehensive, actionable and probably information and eased pressures on our communities and this council. It is reassuring that the report before the committee today identifies that the Gritston Road site is undeliverable and compromised. This decision is long overdue and is down to the unerring commitment of a small group of residents which brought about an appeal from the developer, and this was overturned and the planning inspector's hearing last year. But on examination of the SHLA, it's clear that details relating to the surface water issues on that Gritston Road site remain incorrect. The LLFA state in that report, apparently, that there are 0 watercourses present across the site. I'm personally aware that the LLFA are aware of watercourses on that site, and there are at least 4. And they have significant impact. I respectfully ask the chair of this committee and the members to ensure that this error is rectified and to establish if officers have consulted with the LLFA since the appeal. In the current Derbyshire Dales Local Plan policy S4, it states the District Council will seek to ensure that new development protects and where possible enhances the landscape's intrinsic characters and distinctiveness, including the character, appearance and integrity of the historic and cultural environment and the setting of Peak District National Park, whilst also facilitating sustainable rural community needs, tourism and economic development. Is this really enough to protect our valuable countryside areas outside the adopted development boundaries? I think not, and I would respectfully ask that this committee, in liaison with our planners, seek an implementation of a more robust, independent policy, thereby hopefully providing reassurance and security to our communities, which will ensure that the continued delineation of our communities, like has been mentioned before, Tansley into Matlock, Darley-Dale into Matlock, and Clifton into Ashbourne. This is really important. And I value Councillor Chapman's comments
Wind up, please,
about
Councillor
sustainability. Finally, if the Gritston Road is not to be included in the new local plan, will the committee ensure the Matlock settlement boundary between Gritston Road and Sandy Lane, which was altered many years ago, is reinstated to where it was before? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wayne. Next speaker this evening is George Dutton, who's speaking as a local resident. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee. I've lived and worked. I've lived in Bradley for 55 years. I've worked and developed our family business on the Ashbourne Airfield industrial estate over that period. We're now the 5th largest company operating on the airfield, a very important point which makes Ashbourne such an important location is that if you draw a 70-mile radius of Ashbourne, over half the population of Great Britain live in that area. So it's obviously going to be at all times a very big point of attraction for industry in the future. We want to know as industrialists where the industrial infrastructure is being shown as a part of your future planning. One of the things that the issues that people don't understand, and it's never talked about, a number of entrepreneurs living in the Ashbourne and Derbyshire Dales district is the greatest number outside of London. So there's obviously the whole area is a very industrial area. The desire to live and work in Ashbourne district is obvious. To complement that, the intellectual level of children in the area is excellent. This is proven by the Derbyshire University who do surveys, and this level is amongst the highest in the Midlands. So obviously we've got all the facilities that prove progress for the future is in safe hands if we have the right industry. But industry has seen so many opportunities to have an eastern bypass thrown away. From 1978, following the Boundaries Commission reorganisation, this was the first time the industries of Ashbourne Airfield stated it was a priority. This reoccurred in 1990-91. An international company wanted to supply Toyota, put forward a 65 million scheme to build a factory on the airfield, including a bypass, which was seen as imperative. This, unfortunately, was delayed by the county and they went elsewhere. Again, in 2006, there was a massive international company wanted to come to Ashbourne, and again, this was put in jeopardy by the county council, who wouldn't agree the final details, and they went and built elsewhere. It was an international company. This has to be rectified as a major priority above all other aspects of Ashbourne and the district of Ashbourne, to provide a link road from the A517 to Belper to link across the airfield to the A52. Not only would it cure the gridlock in Ashbourne, it would improve the quality of life for everyone. The County Council has this one last opportunity to correct the disasters of the past of not providing this link road, and it's got to be safeguarded in any future planning as a must-have. We cannot have the gridlock of morning and afternoon. Today it was a gridlocked Ashbourne again. It's just a hopeless situation, and it's now at the forefront of industrial companies coming to the area.
Could you wind up, please?
Yeah. Do this and you'll unlock the future of Ashbourne in so many positive ways. You could never even manage. Plus village life in hamlets like Bradley and Osmaston, which I live in Bradley. When I first started 55 years ago, I used to go to the airfield in the morning and meet 3 vehicles. And now, since the development on the airfield, meet 15.
I must ask
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I speak from the heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dutton. I'm trying to be fair to everyone to give you a fair crack of the whip. Our final speaker this evening is Councillor Sandra Spencer from Ashbourne. I understand you're speaking as a local resident rather than a town councillor.
Is that on? Can you hear me? Right. I'm speaking as a local resident tonight. In general, I think this plan is over-expansion of Ashbourne. Not only will it lose too much green space, but will increase traffic beyond the capacity of the road network. Even though the document clearly explains the need for schools and healthcare provision, I'm doubtful these new provisions will materialise, especially if the development is piecemeal. Regarding sewage, Severn Trent says that the network can cope, but appears to have just looked at the individual sites. I would like to see the final plan to have an overall comment from Severn Trent on the scheme as a whole. Highways assessments are again mostly individual, which is okay, but taken as a whole are inadequate. They've not made any comment on the wider impact of increased traffic. Again, the final plan needs an overall comment on the scheme as a whole. Take, for example, Schlar 239 off Station Street. Highways say there's no need for a pedestrian crossing. Informal dropped curbs would be okay. Disagree with this. The A515 is in great need of more crossing points, and new development will exaggerate this. Schlar 1096 lands south of the A52. I'm concerned of the 2.2 mile walk to Queggs, which will require crossing the A52. A safe pedestrian route should be in place for children to get to school safely. But as we all know, even if this was provided, many parents will drive their children to school, increasing more traffic problems at peak times. This development seems to me to be an unwelcome expansion of Ashbourne into a new area outside the settlement boundary. It's also unclear why many of the developments coloured in purple shown on the map are there as they have already been built. Schlar 926, land off Green Road. This site is the only one that impacts people north of the river. The traffic impact will be greatly added to more congestion on this road, not only for the residents who live on this road, but will increase more traffic congestion for them and the traffic in the town. Part of this site is also within a flood zone. There will be loss of biodiversity. The entry to the site sits very close to a bend when approaching into Green Road. Again, unwelcome expansion of Ashbourne into a new area outside the settlement boundary. I live on this road, and the speed at which traffic comes down, I feel this entry suggested to this site could be an accident waiting to happen. The infrastructure of this town literally cannot sustain the amount of another 58% more housing. On the whole, Ashbourne, I feel, is being unfairly treated. I personally would implore the committee who are putting this plan forward to go back to the drawing board and rethink about what such an impact it's going to spoil what a lovely town, the gateway to the Peak District this is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer, and thank you to all that have made contributions this evening. A lot of you have drawn attention to issues of infrastructure, whether it's roads, public transport, community facilities, and I need to assure you that's uppermost in our officers' minds, our consultants' minds, and this committee's minds. And I think we'll hear later on this evening how that issue is going to be addressed. But sincere thank you for all of you taking the time and trouble to come and talk to us this evening. Right, the next part of our public participation agenda this evening is the responses to questions that we've received from members of the public before the cut-off date, which was midday on last Friday. So we've had a number of questions submitted to us. The questions are going to go on the screen. Is it on the screen now? So the first question is from Anne Arnell, who's a resident of Darley Dale. I'm going to read out the response to the question. The Council has undertaken a strategic housing and economic land availability assessment. Bit of a mouthful that, but that's what is called a SHILAR, which is later on the agenda, item 6. The paper sets out the process for identifying and assessing sites. The Council has sought to identify brownfield sites and assess their potential for future housing and employment development. The former Ashbourne Airfield site is recommended as an allocation, accommodating more than 1,100 dwellings. There are also a number of former quarries identified through that process that have been recommended for future allocations, which together would accommodate more than 1,200 dwellings. Sites considered to have potential have then been considered through the site selection process. And agenda item 5 tonight details this process further. And then there's a second question from Anne Arnell. And my answer to that is the local plan is being informed by technical evidence covering a range of matters, including transport and infrastructure. This will inform the likely impact of the proposed allocations on the transport network and the potential mitigation that is needed when taking into account opportunities to travel by a variety of modes, such as buses, cycling and walking alongside the private car. Parking standards set by Derbyshire County Council will be used to inform the layout and number of spaces on developments through the planning application process. And then a third question. Reply to this. The Council does not hold this information because Derbyshire County Council and the East Midlands Combined County Authority are responsible for the delivery of highways and public transport respectively, including temporary traffic lights and bus services. We now have a set of questions from Councillor David Chapman from Darley Dale Town Council. The answer to the first question is SHLAR 1093 is not covered by the existing policy PD10. Notwithstanding this, the Council has reviewed the PD10 policy area and that has informed the consideration of the sites and a revised policy. The Council is of the view that the purpose of policy PD10 is still valid. The Council wishes to retain the policy and ensure that it is robust and effective. Councillor Chapman's second question. As detailed in agenda item 6, the Council has commissioned work on infrastructure, and the appointed consultants are liaising with infrastructure providers to ensure it is clear what infrastructure is required to support development and who is responsible for delivering it. This will be detailed in an infrastructure delivery plan that will sit alongside the local plan. We then have questions from Sharon Bridden, which is on the screen there. The response here is yes. The Gritston Road site has not been included because William Davis Homes have stated in writing to the council that they no longer have an interest in this site. The District Council has written to the landowners to find out whether they wish to promote this site for potential development. We did not receive a reply, meaning there is now no basis for including the site in the revised local plan. A second question from Sharon Bridden, to which the answer is yes. And a third question, reply is the comment about the number of watercourses is a comment from Derbyshire County Council as the lead local flood authority, and you should contact them with regards to this. Derbyshire Dales District Council has done further work as evidenced in the Sheila to identify flood risk on the site, and the description of the site recognises that watercourses are evident on site. So that concludes. No, sorry, I haven't done that, have I? No, okay, I'll do that in a minute. Yeah. That concludes the written questions we've had. We have had a number of late representations from members of the public. We've had one from Joe Woods in relation to sites in Tansley, and one from the Wolds Action Group in relation to Gritston Road. So I'll give members of the committee just an opportunity to read through those representations. Okay, well that concludes the public participation element of the meeting. We now move on to item 3, which is interests. Any member want to declare an interest to any item? No, that's okay. Item 4, that's any questions we've received from members. I think, John, we haven't received any questions. No. Right, we're now going to move on to the two reports which are the substance of this evening's meeting. As I said, I'm going to take item 6 first. This is the evidence-based update. We have a covering report on page 17, and then we have a series of appendices. I would just say that if people are concerned about the length of the material in this item, I think that illustrates to everyone the complexity, the level of detail that goes into the preparation of a local plan. And the reason it's here before you this evening is because, as I've emphasised at previous meetings, we are adopting an open book process to the local plan, so that everyone can be fully aware of what is involved in the local plan, that sees the evidence on which we make, on which recommendations are made, and which decisions are taken. So I apologise for it being a length, but that helps us all to understand, I think, and see what's involved in the local plan process. You have a point of order, Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure it's a point of order,
But it needs to be a point of order, please.
okay, I'll find some other time I can ask you the question then.
Right. I'm going to ask Matt Bowers to introduce item 6, please, Matt.
Thank you, Chair. I'll kick this one off and then I'll pass to my colleague Esther. So this report provides an update on progress on the evidence base, similar to previous reports you've had, and it includes final details of the draft Sheila and also the settlement hierarchy paper. Esther will take you through both of those elements. The table in paragraph 2.2 of the report provides brief summary of the progress on the outstanding evidence base. Not listed in that evidence base is also the work on PD10 and the sustainability appraisal work. Given that the next meeting of this committee will receive a draft plan, there won't be another opportunity to bring those pieces of evidence back before then, and therefore I'm proposing an additional recommendation tonight, and that is that the committee give delegated authority to the Chair and Vice Chair to endorse for noting and publishing the outstanding evidence base as listed in the table in paragraph 2.2, and also the evidence in relation to PD10, the sustainability appraisal and habitats regulation assessments. I'll pass to my colleague Esther, who will take you through the remainder of the report.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Chair. So the first report for you this evening, as we have done previously, seeks to provide an update on the evidence base that's being collected to support the local plan. The evidence base has been compiled to inform the strategy, policies and site allocations, and we are at the stage where we're looking to reach the finalisation of a number of pieces of evidence. Table 2.2 in the report before you this evening summarises the progress that we're making in finalising those outstanding pieces of evidence. The main two items for discussion and noting by the committee this evening relate firstly to the evidence base related to the strategic housing land availability assessment. As members of the committee may well be aware, there's been previous versions of the SHLA considered previously by this authority, and in April 2025 the committee considered a report on the proposed methodology for undertaking the SHLA going forward as part of the review of the local plan. We have sought to broaden the approach that we carry out the SHLA and taken a sort of policy-off approach where we have sought to assess land that has been suggested to the District Council in broader locations than we have done previously. The National Planning Policy Framework requires the District Council to have a clear understanding of the land available in the plan area, and the first stage in undertaking that assessment was a call for sites that was done in late 2024 and then repeated in November 2025. We've sought to identify all possible sources of land for consideration for both housing and employment uses within the district. And the methodology that we've used that's set out in the lengthy papers before you this evening accords with the methodology and approach required by the National Planning Policy Practice Guidance. We are required as an authority to look at all potential sources of supply and ensure that no stone is left unturned in terms of exhausting all possible sites for consideration for inclusion within the local plan. So as part of that, the officer team here have assessed a total of 164 sites. Of those sites, 26 sites were filtered out at the initial stage of the assessment, that's stage A of the assessment. 11 of those sites were deemed too small to be allocated, being below 0.25 hectares. One site fell completely within flood zone, and 14 sites were deemed to be located in isolated or unsustainable locations, completely devoid from any relationship with a nearby settlement. That left a total of 137 sites which have gone through a detailed assessment stage, stage B, which is before you in the committee papers this evening. That assessment process seeks to identify whether sites are suitable in terms of their suitability to accommodate housing or employment use. And to determine suitability, we have consulted extensively with statutory consultees to look at sort of highways impact, views of Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, the landscape and visual impact of sites, engaged and consulted with the Environment Agency, the lead local flood authority, Severn Trent, colleagues from the historic environment sector, to name but a few. We also need to ensure that the sites we're looking to allocate or identify as developable are achievable. So we need to have there needs to be a reasonable prospect that those sites will be delivered at a particular point of time and certainly within the plan period that we're looking to plan for. Those suitable sites that we consider to be developable are noted in paragraph 2.16 of the report before you this evening. And we're asking the committee to note the final outcomes of the SHLAR and for the report to be published on the Council's website. The second substantial piece of evidence for you this evening is an update to the settlement hierarchy. The settlement hierarchy is considered to be a valuable policy tool to ensure development is delivered in a sustainable way, guiding development to sustainable locations where opportunities for access to local services, facilities and employment are available in a way that minimises environmental impacts and the need to travel. As you may recall, a draft version of the settlement hierarchy was presented to committee in October last year. A number of points were raised at that meeting and officers have sought to reflect those comments that were received. Notably, we have amended the microphone stopped working. Notably, we've reviewed the way that we've scored the education and the ability of, they're both gone. Oh. Sorry, they're intermittent here at the front. But yeah, we've sought to try and alter the scoring for education and make that simpler. We've also reviewed some of the comments that we received in respect of access to public transport and proximity to major employment areas. Again, the final version of the settlement hierarchy is before you this evening for noting and to be published on the Council's website. I would just reiterate it's part of the evidence base that we use to develop the spatial strategy, which is the next item on the agenda for your consideration this evening. Matt and I would be happy to take any questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Esther, in particular. As Esther Lindley has told us, this is a technical piece of work related to the SHLAR and the settlement hierarchy, and it's a piece of work undertaken by our highly professional and experienced planning officers, as Esther said, informed by expertise from our external partners. The report's tabled for noting, but officers would be pleased to take any questions of clarification. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. It's an observation more than anything else. Fantastic report, lots of detail. Whatever.
Can we please restrict it to questions, please? We've got a lot to go through. We can make observations when we come to the debate. Questions,
It's not a
please.
good look, is it?
Any further questions? Councillor Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. Hope the mic stays on. It's a question that I have talked with Matt about before, but I think listeners might like to be reassured. A lot of the infrastructure comments as you work your way through the SHLARs are site-specific, and points were raised, I think, by Sandra Spencer about cumulative impact. Could you reassure us that this aspect will be dealt with when the infrastructure delivery plan is presented in due course?
Through you, Chair, yes, I can give you that reassurance, Councillor Dobbs. We have appointed consultants to prepare an infrastructure delivery plan. We also have SA consultants which will be looking at appraising the sites individually and also looking at the cumulative effects of sites around the certain locations that we've identified. So they'll be looked at from an infrastructure point of view and a sort of sustainability appraisal impact.
If I may have a supplementary, is that okay, Chair? Just to add the point that George Dutton made about an eastern bypass, because the existing plan looks and mentions a western relief road. Presumably that will be addressed as well in the infrastructure delivery plan? Or could be on request?
It could be if it was something that came from discussions with the County Council. At the moment, we don't have any evidence to support safeguarding a route for a link road either side of Ashbourne. But as part of the site selection work, we have suggested that that would be explored further with colleagues at the County Council.
Thank you.
Sorry, who is next? Yeah. Lucy, Councillor Peacock.
So one of the public speakers mentioned sites that are listed, read this, read that, but overall suitability, yes. Now, looking at it myself, I'm guessing that that's where it's red because there's a potential problem, but that problem is overcomable. Is that correct? Or is there another reason why some of them are red, suitable?
I think in that particular case and in others like that, it's because the site has subsequently been granted planning permission.
Okay, because what I was going to ask was, in order that because we're making quite a difficult decision here. Overall, in making the plan, all of us. And I wondered if we would reduce public anxiety about it by highlighting the reasons why something might be labelled as red, but then subsequently deemed developable. That was. So it's a sort of a suggestion, but framed as a question. Is that possible in the time you've got?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and we can certainly take that away and look at what we can do in terms of presenting the outcomes of the SHLAR in a different format to make that clear in terms of what our existing commitments in terms of planning permissions. Yes, certainly.
sorry, and I did have one more question. The other question is, and I don't know if it fits here or in the other, probably here. I notice also that some of the sites that were in the existing plan, specifically Middle Peak Quarry in Wirksworth, it's been in the plan for 10 years. Nothing at all has come forward, and there are lots of difficulties with that site. How much dialogue has happened with the owners of that site to suggest that it is going to come forward? Is the inspector going to object to this, given that it hasn't come forward in 10 years?
As part of rolling those existing allocations forward, yes, we have been in dialogue with the landowners and the promoters of those particular sites. As part of the evidence that we will be required to submit with the local plan, we will be looking to enter into memorandums of understanding with individual site owners and promoters to provide additional evidence to the inspector that those sites are indeed available and achievable in the timescales that we're looking at. So yeah, there is further work to do on that, and we are engaging with the landowners.
Thank you, and thank you, Esther. I think the suggestions you made in response to Councillor Peacock, I think that'd be very helpful. I would just say that some of the sites which may have been read, sites do get planning permission despite the best efforts of this council. The speaker mentioned the site at Clifton. This council was adamant that that site should not get planning permission. The site was refused by this council, and the planning inspector appointed by the government chose to grant it planning permission. So there are external circumstances which unfortunately we have to deal with. Right, who is next? Who wanted to speak? Ask a question. Councillor Burfoot, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think we all have agreed during this process and the previous process for the current local plan that priority should be given to brownfield sites throughout the district. Now, most of those are in Matlock and Wirksworth, actually, to be honest, because they're old quarry sites. Wirksworth, as we've just heard, was Middle Peak Quarry and Cromford Road. As we've heard, nothing's been developed on those sites. Development has been stalled in Corder Quarry for many years. We've got about 70 flats being built already, but the developers obviously chose to develop those before going into the what everyone knows is a heavily contaminated site, the rest of the quarry. So, seeing as it's been that those sites have been assessed as both developable and achievable, to quote the assessments, how can you be confident that those sites, including Halldale Quarry in Matlock as well, Halldale and Corder, are actually developable and achievable, given the fact that they're both fraught with loads of problems in terms of the topography, removal of stone, unquarried stone, levelling of the sites, and then what will be revealed when the owners of Corder Quarry begin to excavate will be a tremendous amount of contamination, which has got to be cleared. And everyone who's lived in Matlock for 30, 40, 50 years knows what people suspect went into that, the Halldale, or Corder Quarry in particular. It was tipped on for many years, so the decades of all sorts of contamination. So what investigation is carried on to try to ascertain what other level of contamination in that site particularly, and others in the works with.
Esther or Matt, you might want to reply to the contamination issue. I'm going to ask Steve Capes to respond to the broader question of what efforts are made to bring forward development of brownfield sites such as those you mentioned.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Burfoot. And yeah, there is a lot going on to try to move those sites forward. As you'll know, some of them do have the benefit of outline planning permission. Both Corder Quarry and indeed now Halldale Quarry have got planning permissions in place, which is an important step forward onto moving from allocation towards development. We do work with landowners and promoters and their developers and their agents where possible. We do have those links. The other thing that we do as a council is put them in touch with potential funding bodies. In our case, that's the East Midlands Combined Authority, who do have brownfield land funds available and encourage and where possible assist them to apply. And that's an ongoing process for these sites. They're at different stages, acknowledging their difficult, their challenges, but they are sites that we do make efforts to try to move forward.
Thank you, Steve. I don't know whether you can reply to the contamination question.
In terms of the issue about contamination, we have sought the views of our environmental health colleagues. Obviously, should a subsequent planning application come forward on the site, then there's likely to be conditions or pre-commencement conditions on that would require desktop assessment in terms of contamination and how that may be dealt with or mitigated. At the next meeting of this committee, we will be giving you detailed site allocation policies for the sites. So for a site such as that, where we acknowledge that there may be issues with contamination, then it's likely that the policy would require further investigation work to look at that as part of the policies that will come to you for consideration.
But briefly, Chair, there is an not outline. It has a current application of about 200 houses in the middle of Corder Quarry. Next one on from the flats that have been developed already off Matlock Spa Road. Are you aware of any discussions about that? Because that's been installed in the development plan team here, but also presumably I believe in terms of the failure of the developers to submit certain items of information which were required to satisfy the planning officer's demands. Is that because of the contamination, or is it because of other issues?
Chair, if I can help on that one, to the best of my knowledge, that's not to do with contamination. That those discussions between this council and the developer and indeed other authorities who are party to the application, they're still ongoing.
Councillor Buckler, Matt.
Yeah, in some ways it's related to a couple of other questions that have been asked earlier on, and the key point about, and the reason that we're trying to do this quickly is because of the deadline at the end of the deadline for getting a revised local plan, so that we've got appropriate housing allocation to have a 5-year supply. That's correct, which has got to be done quickly, otherwise we've got to start again. The issues around contamination and sites not being developable when the applications come in, how over allocated will we be if all of these sites come in? Because what we've got to ensure that it's not developers who decide where development happens, it's the local authority, it's us. We've got to have that 5-year supply, don't we? So how big is our envelope compared to that 5-year supply?
So thank you for the question. So in terms of the change to the planning system, the council does need to submit a plan before the end of the year under the current system. Otherwise it would have to start again, and then there would be a longer time without a plan in place. And I think the council's made that decision some time ago to go down that route. Not really in relation to this paper, it's more, your question's more in relation, I think, to the next paper on the agenda, in terms of the potential sites that could be allocated. If those sites are added up, actually the number of homes in total that would be built in the plan period is less than the requirement from the government. So there isn't really, you're not going above it, you're actually shooting below. I think the other thing just to add in terms of the conversation around contamination and planning applications, this is a strategic piece of work. We're not doing a planning application on 160 sites. That's not the intention of it. It is high level. We won't know all the detail, but some of that should come through planning applications. And the policy framework that we're going to put in place will help to ensure the delivery of those sites as far as possible.
Would you like to say something about the mitigation work that's in the evaluating the SHLA?
Yes, so in terms of the work in the SHLA, that has identified issues, for example, that they will be picked up through the policy. So if there is a particular issue on site that needs mitigating, that then will flow through into the policy itself, that will be a requirement to do that mitigation.
Councillor Bond, Jeff. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to clarify, Councillor Burford, the largest brownfield site is in Ashbourne, not in Matlock. Can I have just clarification? All these sites around Ashbourne, the impact, traffic impact, you say that's up to the county council? Is that correct?
And well, ultimately, it's up to this council. Has mine gone now? I know. We'll take advice from the county council as the highway authority.
I'll come back then. The site on Green Road, I went to the open meeting we had at the town hall, and they highlighted various areas of the town that they needed to improve. That's just one side. So I would say that each junction, Madge Corner, Park Road, bottom of Derby Hill, needs looking at, and could make a serious impact. So it really needs looking at. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah.
An issue that's already been raised. There is a great deal of concern about the A6 and the urban sprawl which is occurring along the A6 corridor from Roseley to Matlock. I'm particularly concerned, and I know other councillors are particularly concerned about SHLAR 911 and SHLAR 1093, which we feel are going to add to the filling in and the unification of very distinct communities at the moment under one roof of Matlock. I would like to ask what protections, what reassurances can be put in place to ensure that these separate towns and communities can retain their sense of separation if these sites, which will be visible from the A6 and certainly 1093 from both sides of the valley, what reassurances, what protections can be put in place to retain the separate identities of both Darley-Dale, Matlock, and indeed further down the A6, Roseley?
Thank you, Councillor. So I think, again, if sort of looking ahead to the next item on the agenda, through the site selection work and then through the policies themselves, there can be requirements for sites to mitigate their impacts and enhance the site through things such as landscaping and the provision of open spaces. I think it's important to note that whilst the maps show the size of the site that's been identified to the council, the assessment of that site and the site selection work doesn't assume that development would happen on the whole of that site.
Thank you, Councillor Franks. I think that was an important question, important reply there from Matt Bowers. Councillor Murphy, Dermot, you have a question.
Thank you, Peter. Given Ashbourne traffic levels and regular gridlock already means that the town suffers from illegal levels of vehicle exhaust and particulate pollution, which are poisoning pedestrians, how do Derbyshire Dales District Council intend to work with Derbyshire County Council and the East Midlands Combined Authority to ensure that the new local plan gives proper assurance to concerned residents that solving traffic problems will be addressed with the same level of importance given to attempting to comply with, frankly, ridiculous centrally imposed housing targets?
So one of the pieces of work the council are undertaking to support the local plan, as Esther mentioned earlier, was around infrastructure. So the council are engaging with a variety of infrastructure providers, including the county council and MCA as their role in terms of public transport, to understand what the future needs will be and how best they can be delivered.
But surely we've already got data that we've been collecting for some time on the levels of pollution in Ashbourne, as it is, with this expanding number of houses and whatever. Have we actually shared that information with the highways and asked them to look very closely at this? Because due to some serious work Peter Dodson has done, you know, it is a major issue. We keep getting told, and I think we need a little bit more of an answer really before we can sort of, you know, approve, you know, this plan. It's a live problem that we've had for several years, and we don't seem to be addressing it. And I do hear what you say, but you know.
I mean, just to be clear, this isn't the plan. This is part of the evidence base to support the plan. And apologies, I took your first question to ask, have we spoken to those people? And so hence my answer. And in terms of the, I think you referred to things like the AQMA, our environmental health team here at the council, through their work, I'm sure have been liaising with Derbyshire County Council Highways on the information that we have.
Councillor Boynton.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a query in relation to the targets that we have set, and from what Matt said, we're clearly not going to achieve those targets with this plan. So are we still looking for sites, or is that a closed book now with this draft plan? And if that's the case, is this plan then going to fail?
So in terms of looking for sites, we're now at a stage where we're not going out actively and looking for more sites. We haven't got time to do that. I believe all the sites that we've had submitted to us through this Shire work is probably all we're going to get for the time being. So no, we're not going out and looking for more sites in that regard. It is a risk, as you know, as a committee, around about not being able to meet the housing targets for 15 years. I think from officers' point of view, as we mentioned earlier, the key thing for us to do is to make sure that we leave no stone unturned and to demonstrate to an inspector that the council has done all it can to try and meet that figure, which we know is a vastly a significantly increased figure from what it was previously. And realistically, delivery won't jump as quickly as the target has jumped. So there may be a requirement for a stepped trajectory in the plan, and there may be a requirement for us to include a review mechanism as well. And I think through the next paper, where we'll cover off the strategy, you'll start to see some of that coming through as to how we'll be able to articulate where the council is going in the future in terms of meeting its future development needs.
I thought that was a very pertinent question, Councillor Bates. There, it's always open to this council to this committee to recommend that further sites are brought forward for housing, other than those that are proposed this evening. That's always open to this committee if they wish to do that. Do we have any questions on the settlement hierarchy? Councillor Murphy.
Well, further to your visit to Hulham Ward on Monday night, which was greatly appreciated, Hulham Ward have concerns about the fact that they're classed as being in clear Tier 3, and they believe they've lost enough facilities in recent years, sadly, that they should really be considered as Class 4. But I'm just wondering if there's 30 housing units allocated in this new local plan for Holland, what difference might it make if they were in Tier 4 compared to Tier 3? And is it possible for the village to appreciate and see the how we actually arrived at Tier 3 for the village and not Tier 4? Is there some workings that we could share?
I'm sure Esther can reply to that, and there are workings, yes.
Through you, Chair, yeah. The settlement hierarchy is a very detailed technical piece of work, and there are appendices in the agenda pack for you this evening which seek to set out how we have audited the services and facilities in each settlement and how the scores have been attributed, and then the ranking and the tiers within which the settlements fit. So it is there, but I do take the point that it is quite a technical piece of work and it needs to be gone through in a lot of detail to compare settlements like for like, but that evidence is there. In terms of the sites that are proposed in Holland Ward, we would be looking for contributions towards improvements to existing infrastructure in that location, and it may be that the larger site in Holland Ward, we may have a detailed site allocation policy for that, which sets out some of the things that we would envisage coming forward on the back of development. Have you got anything to add, Matt, to that?
But the difference between a Tier 3 and a Tier 4, what effect would that have had on, agreeing to those two sites in the village? Would it have made any difference?
I think again, it relates to the next item on the agenda, but it's a sort of hypothetical question, difficult to answer. Yeah, and I think you'd have to look at it in the context of the overall numbers and what else was being developed in those tiers and the strategy in place. So it possibly is probably the answer.
I think that's a difficult question to answer off the cuff, but it requires some research. Councillor Burfoot, you wanted to come back.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In terms of site selection criteria and so on, to what extent have the access to a proposed site been taken into account in terms of whether it's an adopted road by the Highway Authority or not? Because the Tansleywood Mills, which is a site, a brownfield site between Matlock and Tansley on the boundary of the two parishes, has been atop of the list of unresolved planning applications for the past, as long as I've been on the council, even longer, probably since about the late noughties. And it's still not been developed. It's allocated here for 50 dwellings. It's originally allocated in the present local plan for mixed commercial or business and residential use, and now it's just 50 houses. Well, the implication of that for an unadopted, narrow, partly unpaved access road, or alternatively a very narrow lane, about 1 in 4, 1 in 5, I think, slope onto the A5 onto the main road to Tansley, makes it, to me, unacceptable as a development site as it stands. So who actually, is it left to the county council to decide whether it can go ahead or not? Because it would have to be reconstructed by somebody at enormous cost, and that's probably why it's been stalled for so many years.
In terms of the issues you've raised about how we've engaged with the Highways Authority, they have commented on that particular site, and they have acknowledged that it is somewhat constrained in terms of visibility and access to the highway. However, they do consider that as part of development there may be opportunities to improve the current situation. So as a consultee to this process, as a technical process, we have taken on board the views that they've presented to us. Should a planning application come forward on that site, obviously we would consult with the Highways Authority as the technical experts in that area, and take their views as part of the determination of any planning application as the Planning Authority.
Councillor Buckler, Matt.
Yeah, it's a sort of follow-up to Councillor Murphy's point about Tier 3 and Tier 4 and the levels of sort of community infrastructure that they've got. Is there a mechanism within the local plan for us to specify what we want communities to have? Because, you know, the point that Councillor Murphy made was that, you know, there's been quite a loss of community infrastructure in that community, which obviously is going to make that community less sustainable. You know, there are opportunities for us to say, actually, in order to have this number of houses, this community has got to have a doctor's surgery, has got to have, you know, whatever, which provides some would provide some reassurance to the community that they're, you know, that they're not just getting development without a rebuilding of community infrastructure, which is going to make them. Otherwise, they just see development as making the places where they live worse. When actually we could be doing stuff to make their places better if we can put in the local plan that it's got that settlements of this sort have to be this or.
Through your chair, thank you, Councillor. Yes is the answer. So the plan will contain an infrastructure delivery plan that will outline infrastructure that's required across the district, and in some cases that may require contributions from sites as they come forward to make financial contributions to improvement of existing or to enhance existing or provision of new. And in other cases, it may well be that the policies, and I think again looking at the next paper on the agenda, you'll see through in the appendix there, where it's been highlighted that the site itself should deliver some facilities, be that, for example, a shop, or in the case of, say, the airfield in Ashbourne, you know, a school. So there is a sort of two opportunities in the plan to address that issue.
Sorry, can I come back on that as well? So I think it'd be really good to be specific, to be really clear when we talk about infrastructure that we mean things which aren't just grey infrastructure, which has been one of the things that the plan has talked about. That, you know, there is green infrastructure, blue infrastructure, community infrastructure. All of these things need to be in place for communities to be good places to live, rather than just places to live.
Through your chair, yes, we agree that infrastructure covers a wide variety of different types of infrastructure. I'm using the term in its most general sense, but it could be education, it could be community hub, it could be a tennis court, it could be doctors, secondary school contribution, utilities, all of those things, and the IDP will identify where those needs are.
What I would say, Councillor Buckler, about that is precisely the point which Councillor Hughes and I have made when we've been to meet with the parish and town councils. That's the difference between a mediocre plan and a good plan. And you will see when we come on to look at the next agenda item, the spatial development strategy is very clear that this is not about just house building, this is about sustainable communities. And it's up to us as a committee, both in the plan and when we come on to the delivery of the plan, which it will take many years, it's us to ensure that what we put in words in the plan is delivered through deeds and actions. Right, if we've got no more questions, can we move on to the 3 recommendations plus the additional recommendation? We can take them one at a time. The first recommendation is that we note progress on the evidence base. And do I have someone who would move that recommendation? Councillor Peacock? Councillor Buckler? Would either of you like to speak at this stage on that? Would any member like to contribute to a debate on that recommendation? If not, Can we all have those in favour, please show? Thank you. Those who are against? And I don't think we have any abstention, do we? So that is carried. Move on to recommendation 2. That is the committee note the final SLA and publish the report on the council's website. Would anyone be prepared to move that recommendation? Councillor Peacock.
Could I move it with the additional recommendation, because I'm not sure it makes sense on its own? Do you see what I mean? I wouldn't want one to fail and the other one to pass.
We're looking at recommendation 2. Sorry,
The additional recommendation. So we're saying that we'll publish it, but we're obviously not going to publish it until the other things are ready, presumably. So are they not related?
This recommendation relates purely to the SLA. The other recommendation relates to other pieces of evidence.
Okay, fine. But yeah, I'm happy to move it.
Okay, sorry. Do you want to speak on it? No. Councillor Dobbs, were you prepared to second?
I am, Chair.
Do you want to add anything at this stage?
No, just to underline that this is all part of generating a local plan, and as I'll comment later, we very much need a local plan. Thank you.
Any contributions to a debate then? Councillor Burfoot, yes.
We can comment on individual sites at this stage, or ones that we think are totally unacceptable in terms of the impact on a small community like Tansey, for example. I'm not sure which.
You may make. Well, we've had a recommendation moved and seconded, so you would need to make an amendment to that.
Yeah. Well, I want to say that, in fact, I agree entirely with Councillor Rains from Tansey Parish Council about the impact of the Jack Hill Farm site. 150 houses on top of what's already been approved and built in Tansey. In fact, that site's going to be three times the size of the next largest application that's been approved in recent years. So it's totally out of scale with the size of the village without any retail shops, for instance, and other facilities. And and it's also extending the, if you like, the footprint of the village and the settlement boundary, as has been said by various people who've spoken or sent questions in. You know, the Greenfield site, it's farmed at the moment. It's quite an attractive open space, and it's totally unsuited to the number of houses that are proposed. It's not been, I don't know, it's been assessed, I suppose, on paper as a possible development site because it fulfills various criteria, I guess, but it doesn't fulfil the criteria of scale of development, as you would say, with a small plot, whereas a large house proposed on a very small site, when it be totally out of scale. Well, this is a far bigger problem. With 150 houses imposed on a fairly small village without the right infrastructure, drainage issues as well, all sorts of problems with it. And I just don't think it's acceptable. So I can't vote for that particular site, for example. And there are others which, the Old Hackney Lane front, the one between Old Hackney Lane and Hackney Road, is going to cause so many more problems for Matlock and Dollydale in terms of access and traffic and congestion and so on. And I think that one's unacceptable. It's only 14 houses, but I think it's going to be probably the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of accessibility and amenity for local residents. So,
Councillor Burfoot, could I gently suggest that this is a technical report. You're questioning whether the site should be taken forward
yes.
in the local plan,
yes.
which is what we're going to consider on the next item.
Oh, right. Okay.
If you don't mind, I'm not
That's
saying
right.
what you're not raising important points, but that will be part of consideration of the next paper. If you'd like to defer to that discussion.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Boynton.
Chair, it's just going to go along with Councillor Burfoot and say there are other villages, of course, Duffridge being one of them, for which the same applies. However, I understand that this particular
item is just to note it. Is that correct?
Yes. Right. Can we move to a vote then? It's been proposed and seconded that we accept recommendation 2. Can we have all those in favour? Those against? And no abstentions, I don't think, so that is carried. Recommendation 3 relates to the settlement hierarchy. So the recommendation here is that we note the final settlement hierarchy report and publish the report on the council's website. Would anyone care to move that recommendation? Councillor Peacock, do you want to speak on that? Do we have a seconder? Councillor Buckler, do you want to speak, Matt? Do we have any contribution to debate? No. Can we move to a vote then? Can we have all those in favour? Those against? And that is carried. Then we have the additional recommendation 4. Has that been circulated to everybody? Right, so we're all clear what that recommendation is.
Members of the public may not.
Right, just for members of the public here this evening, I'll read the additional recommendation. It relates to page 19 of the agenda. That's table 2.2, which details the evidence that is required to justify the policies in the local plan. We've just accepted the evidence relating to the strategic housing land availability assessment and the settlement hierarchy. There's a range of other pieces of evidence which need to be noted before we arrive at consideration of the final plan. This recommendation gives delegated authority to the Chair and Vice Chair to endorse for noting and publishing the outstanding evidence base as listed in the table in paragraph 2.2, and also the evidence in relation to emerging policy PD10, that's the policy relating to Derbyshire Dale, the sustainability appraisal and the habitats regulation assessment. Do I have someone who would be prepared to move that? Councillor Buckler, do you want to speak on that? Councillor Dobbs, you've been slightly behind the curve on all these, but you can second it. Yes.
Happy to second.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy to propose it, and it's just worth making clear to everybody that what we're doing is noting the evidence that we've got and putting it onto the website so that there can be more consultation, so that we can get more responses to it. We're not saying that we approve of everything on it. We're not saying we agree with everything on it. But we are saying that we think that we've got the evidence and it should go onto the website. And the reason for this recommendation is that we don't have to have another committee meeting to say that we agree with this going onto the website. So I will completely support that.
Thank you, Matt. That was helpful. Any further contributions? If not, move to a debate. All in favour, please show. Those against? No abstentions, I don't think, so that is carried. Does anyone want a short break before we move on to the next item? Does anyone need to visit the toilet? Can we go straight on? Okay, we're going to move on then to item. This is where we're considering our spatial development strategy and the implications which flow from that, which are the proposed sites for new housing and new employment. I think what I'd say here is that a point is being made by our officers that there is still work to do in the final plan itself to set out particular policies which would apply to each site taken forward to go into the plan to address a lot of the issues that have been raised this evening about various types of infrastructure, green, community facilities, transport infrastructure, etc. And equally the important point that has been made that the site boundary, which is shown on the sites in the report, will not necessarily be the same site boundary which is incorporated in the local plan. But you'll notice on a number of the sites that the capacity of the site in terms of dwellings, estimated dwellings, is very much reduced from the capacity which was put forward by the advocate of the site, and that implies that our officers consider that only a proportion of the site is suitable for housing development, and that will be elaborated further in the local plan. So Matt, I think you're going to introduce this report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the report sets out a preferred spatial development strategy and the candidate sites to deliver that strategy. The draft spatial strategy has been informed by the vision and the objectives that you have previously agreed, the sustainability appraisal work undertaken to date, evidence collected to date, and the Regulation 18 consultations, as well as feedback from yourselves and the community. That draft spatial strategy is set out in paragraph 2.5. You'll recall from your meeting back in April on the 29th, you endorsed a three-stage methodology to the process for selecting sites for housing and employment uses. We've now completed two of those stages, utilising the strategy with the essay to be undertaken on individual sites and the cumulative impact of those to be considered as well, still to be done. At this stage, unless compelling evidence is received to the contrary, these are the draft site allocations which will be included in the draft plan. The candidate areas for housing development will make provision for supporting infrastructure and other uses on site, as we've talked about under the last item. These will be set out in policy in the draft plan. And again, as the Chair has just highlighted, while site sizes as shown in the Sheila are shown in the Sheila, the actual site selection work has assumed, in some cases, further limits on development, which reduces down the size of the site. The candidate sites are all set out in the tables below paragraph 2.9. In the report, we highlight how the strategy, from a sort of percentage term in terms of the hierarchy, is working, and that most closely aligns with the sustainability appraisal option 4 that was discussed at the last meeting, and growth option A, again, which was considered at your last meeting. So the next stop after today is for the sustainability appraisal, as I mentioned earlier, to be undertaken on the individual sites and looked at the cumulative impact of those sites, and the development of individual policies for site allocations, utilising the evidence base as it's completed, and utilising the work that you've approved, you've noted under the previous item in terms of the Sheila. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Matt. I think it's evident this is probably the single most important policy decision which the committee is going to be making before we consider the final version of the local plan itself. I think what our officers have tried to do is to balance the requirements that we have from central government, the needs of the district as a whole and the plan area in particular, and the views and aspirations and perhaps fears in some cases of individual communities. So it is that balance that our officers have tried to achieve and have proposed the settlement pattern and the individual sites that go to make that up. So please, yes, ask questions of our officers now. Councillor Bateson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask 3 questions. The first one is the Green Road Ashbourne site. I went to the meeting where the developer did a presentation, and they were talking of nearly 200 houses, and on this plan it's 88. So is this just phase 1 88, or will it go on to a phase 2? That's my first question.
Thank you, Councillor. So the site was promoted, as you can see from the last agenda item, as a larger scale. Through the site selection work and the SHLA work, we've considered that a smaller footprint of development would be more appropriate than the one that was submitted, and therefore a smaller scale site leads to a lower number of houses than the 200. So we've calculated that figure to be 88.
Come back, so the developer could come back and say they wanted 200 on it.
They could do, and they may do through the consultation, as others may say they would like to see none at all. This is the council's plan. The council, if it decides to include this site at the draft stage, that would be a draft allocation, and then if the plan was adopted, that would be an allocation for 88.
Come to question 2.
Supplementary to that, because I think that's an important question you've asked, and I think it's a situation which may arise across the plan area. If the committee this evening took a view that that site should be taken forward into local plan but limited to 80 dwellings, if a planning application came forward subsequently, would our decision this evening be a material consideration in resisting an application for 200 dwellings?
So the MPPF allows you to place weight on an emerging plan, and the more weight you can give to that plan depends on where it is in the process. So if you made a decision today and an application was received tomorrow, the amount of weight that you could attribute to that decision is less than what it would be when it's gone through full council, when it's been submitted to the Secretary of State. So as you move through the plan making process, you can attribute more and more weight in the decision making process to the emerging plan.
Sorry, Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. The next one is Osmaston Peak Caravan Park, SHLA 1096. A lot of the caravans are permanent homes. Is that taken into account with this site? Also, Ashbourne Tennis Club is also a resident of that. Also, is there any chance that we are short of provision for football? Could we say we want some sports provision on there?
Thank you. So the site in the appendix, if I take you to it's actually the first one, I think, on page 1, in the conclusion. The site has been promoted for 700 homes. We feel that a smaller number is more appropriate for that site, as well as the requirement to provide infrastructure and things such as crossings, has been mentioned earlier on in the meeting, across the A52. We have highlighted that there is an opportunity on this site to meet a strategic need for football pitches, for example, as well as possibly other sports, utilising the fact that there are tennis courts already there. This could potentially be a bit of a sports hub.
Can I just come back on that? The crossing you just mentioned, can we push for a bridge? Because crossing that road is an absolute death trap.
Noted, I think, yes.
Peter Dobbs.
Councillor Dobbs. He's Peter.
Thank you, Chair. It follows on from some of Anthony's questions, and I'll just pick up on that. And for members of the public, we were given, and it's published on the website as an appendix. It's called Local Plan Site Selection A, Work in Progress. And it's an incredibly useful summary which makes these comments about the football pitches and other things that we've been talking about. This, as you say, is a work in progress. If we want to add comments, either this evening or subsequently, will they go into this sort of work in progress summary? So if we wanted to put some sort of finesse on some of the points, like Anthony's point about a bridge being the preferred way to cross the bypath, is that possible?
The work will be, the work that's in front of you in terms of the appendix will be developed into a proper paper really that brings together the various committee papers over time. This is work in progress. I think if you've got comments on the appendices, we're happy to receive them. I'm not going to say yes, they'll all go in. They need to be evidence based, but we will take those into consideration.
Thank you. And just to kind of rephrase the point about rear of 120 Green Road, would I be right in saying that, in fact, unless we decide to include it capped at 88, then the developer could come in and say, I'm going to build 250 houses. The flyer that they distributed to Ashbourne was 250 houses. So our best chance of limiting that site to a sensible number is by putting it in the plan. Would I be correct?
That would be, I would agree with that statement, yes.
Councillor Peacock, Lucy.
Sorry, really for the benefit of people listening, also because I've forgotten it, I'm looking at paragraph 2, the table at 2.11 in the report. In the total number of existing allocated sites and new sites gives us 5,723 houses. Can you remind me how far short that is of our target, please?
Yes, and I did write it down because I thought I might get asked. So the housing requirement figure we're working towards is 415 dwellings per annum. Over a 16-year plan period, that would give a total requirement of 6,640. We then have to apply a buffer to that of 5%, which then takes that to nearly 7,000 for the sake of rounding up. The supply there is 5,723. We would typically you would discount that as well for non-delivery by 5%, so that's just under 5,500. But then we would also add in a windfall allowance, and we think at the moment we may be able to add in around 900 homes in terms of windfall, and that's typically small-scale sites that don't get allocated in a plan because they're below 10 units or below 0.25 hectares. And so that would, by my rough calculations, give us a total of around 6,300. So equivalent to 1 year's supply short.
Okay, so could you just, I know you've said it before, but could you just spell out to us again the risks that we would take if we were to start, say, taking some of these sites out now, rather than putting forward all the ones that have at least passed the technical inspections, technical assessment, sorry. Could you spell out the risks of what would happen if we did that?
The government and the planning inspectors have been quite clear in terms of saying the starting point is to meet the standard method, which is the housing need calculation. Not doing so, and I think that the inspector, when they did an advisory visit to the council, which has been reported to this meeting, has said that you'd have to really evidence and justify why you weren't meeting that number. The further away you go, in my professional opinion, from that number, the harder it gets to justify that.
Do you want to elaborate on what the eventual risk is if we...
So,
in terms of whether the plan's accepted or not?
So in terms of risk, the inspector may say, I want you to go away and find more sites, and I want you to look at some of these, and maybe Green Lane, I want you to think about, could that be 200 rather than 88, and apply it to various other sites. That is a risk. The the worst risk is that the inspector says this plan is not sound and cannot be capable of being made sound, and asks the council to withdraw it. I think the work that the council has done has demonstrated to date that it is a very challenging number for this district to meet, given the constraints that it faces, and it has done its very best to meet that housing need. So I'd like to think that the council is in a healthier position than the one I have articulated there.
Councillor Buckler.
I'm going to ask a question which I've asked virtually every meeting since for some time, which is about the biodiversity implications, because you've got a section in the report about climate change implications and no mention of biodiversity implications, which you're supposed to have in this report, and you're still supposed to have in this report, which you never have in this report, in these reports. This is effectively development strategy. The local plan is a development strategy. What reference is there to the local nature recovery strategy? Because the conversations that I've had about it is that always that it's got to be compliant with BNG. BNG is a very piecemeal point of view, and there are opportunities for this to be a better plan if we look at green infrastructure and ensure that we comply with the local nature recovery strategy. And again, I do ask every time why there isn't a section in there about the biodiversity implications, and you never put it in it. And I've talked to the monitoring officer about it, talked to the Director of Corporate Services. They've said it's supposed to be in there, and it's not.
Okay, well, in that regard, we'll speak to the officers. It wasn't something I was aware of in terms of it being a requirement in the report. Notwithstanding that, the plan itself, rather than the site selection work, will make reference to the LNRS. We are doing work at the moment on green infrastructure and open spaces and biodiversity. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that, Esther.
So, in relation to the additional recommendation on the previous item, there is work ongoing to look at what the plan can do in terms of delivering an uplift in biodiversity net gain. We have had the preliminary outcomes of that work submitted to us, which is suggesting that on certain sites that we're looking to allocate, there may be scope to require above 10% biodiversity net gain. That evidence hasn't been finalised yet, but will be reported back to this committee as part of an updated policy on biodiversity in the plan.
Yeah, can I just come back on that? Again, as I said, the biodiversity net gain is not necessarily the issue, because you've got to do that. We've got to do that. That's a mandatory point. The point is that this is a strategic document, and biodiversity needs to be considered strategically and not in response to a planning application. You know, it's the same as infrastructure. It's the same as this authority has worked with all the other authorities in the county on the local nature recovery strategy. I know that you're going to say about it, but we need to think about that strategically.
I think the point's well made, and I think I'm sure our officers will incorporate reference to the nature recovery strategy and to our work on green and blue infrastructure in the emerging policies. But let's not prejudge at this stage. Let's hope for the best, if you like. And we, as a committee, it will be up to us when we look at the final plan to make a judgment. Councillor Boynton.
Thank you. Just want to go back to these numbers that Matt's brought to our attention. Does that include Peak Park?
No.
Okay, because I understand that Peak Park have said they're not going to be able to build their allocation. So I understand that we will have to make up, or potentially make up, their allocation. Is that wrong?
If they're unable to meet their housing needs, they will be in a position of where, similar to Derbyshire Dales. It will need to explore opportunities with neighbouring authorities around whether they can help to meet those unmet needs. So they may well ask us as well to do that, but it's not the District Council's sole responsibility to meet their unmet need.
Okay, so
Can I just be clear on that? Sorry, Matt. This has come up on a number of occasions at this committee and the council. The council has made a decision that will not voluntarily meet that gap between the national park allocation, or what it can't build, and the proportion allocated for the district. So we've taken a formal decision that we will not, as I said, voluntarily meet that gap. We will stick with our almost 7,415 a year. That
Jack,
remains the position.
Just come back on you briefly at that. We won't voluntarily doing it, but we could be instructed to do it, which will add another 1,600 houses potentially onto our allocation.
That's a rhetorical question, I think. Yes, but, we've taken a view, and we've looked at the risk, and we assess the risk as being something which I think professionally we think it would be very unlikely that would arise, but it could do. Sorry, was it Dermot, were you next?
Thanks, Chair. Just on that point, I mean, when I was at the Peak Park, they always told us that they're not a housing authority, therefore they don't have responsibility for any targets. Has that changed? Have they actually been allocated a number of houses from central government that they actually have to build?
Well, I think our officers would tell you we have this so-called duty to cooperate, which I'm not sure whether we formally reached agreement, but certainly in the member-led discussions with the National Park Authority, they have agreed the proportion which you've had described to you, the 160 per annum and the 415 per annum.
They've put that in writing.
I think it is in writing.
Is it? Great. Excellent. The point I was going to ask, and I think from what Matt has told us about these housing numbers, I was going to ask about the consultation that we're going to have over 6 weeks and whatever. So it sounds like there's very little opportunity for us to, take any sites out of this plan if, the general public come up with reasonable arguments why they think certain things should be reduced and taken out of the plan. We haven't really got the capacity to do that, have we, if we've got to meet these numbers? Is that correct?
So the Regulation 19 plan that will be consulted on over the summer is the plan the council is happy with, that it thinks it should be adopted. So if through that process and all those consultation responses will then be reported to the planning inspectorate, and they will make a decision around that. Yes. Well, or they will make recommendations to the council.
And then the question is, I presume we've got to have a traveller site in our new local plan. Is that correct?
Yes, we need to make provision for needs for the travelling community, yes.
And how far on are we with actually identifying a site and doing feasibility
Can we restrict
studies?
ourselves to the agenda item, please, Councillor Murphy? We're not here to discussing traveller sites this evening.
It's going to be part of this plan, Peter. I mean,
it will be part of this plan, but it's not part of our agenda this evening.
Isn't that convenient?
No, I'm sorry, it's not convenient. We have an agenda this evening which is looking at housing allocations. Right, Councillor Buckler, did you have another point? Councillor Burfoot.
Yes, I'd like to follow on from Matt Buckler's question and endorse the questions you're asking about biodiversity and so on. And I think it's most important, in fact, in connection with that, because of the opposition to and refusal of the planning application for the Wolds Ritson Road application in Matlock, top of Matlock. we have actually protected that area in terms of biodiversity for the future, hopefully. So can I just ask again, if that site has it got to be physically excluded from the plan, and can the settlement framework boundary be amended to exclude that area? Is that a fact?
We've had that.
Yes, as the answer to the questions earlier, the site is not proposed to be allocated here, and therefore the settlement boundary will be amended to reflect that.
Right, any further questions? If not, we can move into a debate. We have the recommendation before us, a single recommendation, which is the committee endorse the preferred spatial development strategy and the candidate housing and employment sites to deliver that strategy. Someone like to move that? Councillor Peacock, would you like to speak at this stage?
Yes, I will speak on this one. There isn't a perfect strategy here. We're in a very, very difficult position, as has just been spelt out. I would like to say that personally, I have some objections to that Middle Peak site. It's in my ward. It joins up, works with Middleton. But I'm not going to try and argue that we take it out of the plan, because I can see that if we start doing that, then we put ourselves in a position where we're at much greater risk of the whole plan failing. And we know what happens if we don't have a local plan. Developers just get to build wherever they like. I think on balance, I'm impressed with what the officers have done here. I think on balance, it's the best we have in very difficult circumstances, and I think we should agree to it, and I submit that I put forward the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Peacock. I'm sure our officers appreciate that. Do we have a seconder to that, please? Councillor Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're between a rock and a hard place. I think members need to realise what you're doing if you don't support the local plan. If you look at Ashbourne, analysis of Ashbourne in the last 12 years shows we've built about 750 homes. There's a significant proportion of those built in the southern part, and you could say there's about 1,800 homes in that part, actually where Councillor Murphy lives, where they've built some reasonable estates, not universally nice estates. The developers have done a reasonable job. There's no community at all. In that area, there is no pub, no community hall, no church, and precious few shops. That's what happens if you don't have an active local plan creating communities. That's what you are effectively saying you're happy with if you don't support a local plan and you let the developers do whatever they like. It's really, really high stakes. We don't want to be in this position. The timetable has been imposed on us, but the longer we kick the can down the road of creating a local plan, the more the developers will do what they like. And the rear of Green Road will probably be 250 houses. They could probably build at a higher density than the 88 quite easily, and they probably want to. So it's those sort of decisions, very unpopular decisions, I freely admit. I'm not looking forward to the next Ashbourne Town Council meeting because I'm sure they will have a go at me. But what is the alternative? What else can you do if you want to retain control? We're currently in a very difficult position. Very sobering experience last night at planning when we were told what the alternative might be if actually we didn't go along with a suggestion, actually in Matlock. Because those are the rules. Planning is a rules-based system in which we don't get to make many rules, but we do get to make some in the local plan. People think we are all-powerful when it comes to planning. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I do encourage members to support the local plan, no matter what misgivings you might have about some of these sites, because if we go picking and choosing, we won't have a plan by the deadline. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Dobbs. Just to emphasise yet again, this recommendation this evening is about housing sites. The plan itself is about building sustainable and vital communities. And that is what, as a committee and as an administration, we are determined to do. Any further contributions, please? Councillor Burfoot.
Can I just add to what Councillor Dobbs said? I mean, I agree with him in principle, but I think going back to Tansley, I don't think you can approve a site for 150 dwellings superimposed on a fairly small village without facilities or suitable infrastructure. And so it pains me to say so, but I can't support a plan that's got that scale of development imposed on Tansley village. Others have concerns about, but I'm prepared to ignore those for the time being. But no doubt the council will receive hundreds of objections from residents about some of those sites that are being proposed for allocation. As Councillor Dobbs said, we don't want to do this, but I suppose in some cases we need to accept them, particularly, for instance, the increased coalescence between Matlock and Darley-Dale, which is many people have mentioned over the last year or two, and people have mentioned tonight in their submissions. But you know, the St Elphin's site, for instance, on the A6, and that's a bit of a misnomer in a way, because it says it implies that there's going to be prevention of coalescence between the two communities. But so the development site has been sort of cut short, so it's not covering the whole of the frontage of St Elphin's green space, but it's about 2/3 of it by the looks of it. So I mean that's another I suppose mistake in a way, but it's something that I suppose if you're going to have any development there, I suppose it's better than a complete coverage of the frontage onto the A6. But I think it's the Tansley one which is a no-no as far as I'm concerned, actually how that can possibly be approved. And the implications of it would be enormous for the village of Tansley.
Thank you, Councillor Burfoot. I'll simply add that the plan must, and we will ensure that it does address those issues in terms of development coming forward without the adequate infrastructure. That is a central part of the plan, and then downstream it's for this council and successor councils to ensure that policies in the plan are adhered to.
Can I just say something?
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Peter. There's always it's in my ward, and I've already received stick from the parish council about this particular site. And yes, there are significant issues with it. But there are, as Lucy says, there are significant issues with the sites in Wirksworth. And the people in Darley-Dale, they have significant issues with the sites in Darley-Dale. And Ashbourne has significant, many people in Ashbourne have brought up issues with many of the sites in Ashbourne. If we all reject the sites that we don't like at this stage, then we will end up without a plan. I would point out that the evaluation of the Jack Hill Farm site does suggest that there should be community facilities provided in relation to that. And I would point out that the Tansley School has a shortfall. Its capacity is far greater than the number of pupils in it, and it therefore may be at risk without further development in Tansley. And Highfields, the school that most children will go to at secondary level, has a shortfall, significant shortfall, and therefore the consequences in terms of schools are interesting and maybe very positive. So there are always positive developments that may occur because of some of these large-scale developments, as well as negative developments. and it's difficult to understand that at this stage. Now, what as officers have proposed is that there are policies associated with the larger sites and settlements which include a large number of sites that will describe what needs to be put in place to enable those sites to be sustainable. As Peter O'Brien says, we're interested in building sustainable communities in a sustainable environment, and the spatial development strategy that is proposed here is an attempt to do that with the available sites, the sites that have come forward.
Any further contributions from anyone? If not, we'll move to a vote, please. And we have proposed and seconded. I don't know whether, Lucy, you want to come back as the proposer?
I think Councillor Hughes has just summed up what I think quite nicely. Thanks.
Right, can we have all those in favour of the recommendation please show? All those against? And abstentions? I think I'm right in saying that's carried? That is carried. All right, thank you, colleagues. A challenging meeting. Thank you for your forbearance. I'm sure many relevant points have been made here this evening, both by committee members and by members of the public, which I can assure you our officers will be taking on board as we move forward to our next meeting in June, where we'll be looking at the draft local plan. So that concludes the meeting. Thanks very much to everyone for your attendance, and have a safe journey home.